Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Butterfly Effect podcast. Today, me and Liam are covering part 6 of our Heavy Rain analysis series, the penultimate episode. I know, where's the time gone? But we're not going to rest on our haunches. We're going to go straight into it. And we're starting off with Scott Shelby and Lauren. They're in his apartment, aren't they? They're generally talking about the case. He makes, he says he's making us scrambled eggs, but I'm going to pull him up on this because that is blatantly an omelette, mate. Like, that is not scrambled eggs. But then the game sort of completely goes against itself, and then it gives you an achievement if you do it right, saying that it's an omelette. So, but yeah, little minor nitpick over. But essentially, we know what happens in this scene. They're doing a little bit more investigating. It takes a step further, doesn't it? Because Lauren has a bit of a eureka moment and thinks to compare the lists of the typewriter and the origami magazine subscribers, and they come up with a name. But what I wanted to do, mate, is get your thoughts on the scene, but I mean as well, don't you think it's a bit odd? Like, if you're thinking from Scott's viewpoint at this point, like, you've got to be thinking to yourself, oh fuck, I wish I didn't let this girl come along with me because she's starting to solve everything here.
Yeah, big time. And you know what? I'll go a step further as well. I mean, firstly, to talk about the eggs, yeah, you're not wrong. The worst part as well is that I actually cooked them really well, and she doesn't even touch them. She goes to solve the case, and they're just sat there. And, my heart died a little bit when that happened, because I put a lot of effort in those eggs. But yeah, also, I just think it's actually quite far-fetched to assume that this origami killer is subscribed to this exact origami magazine and also bought a Royal 5 from Manfred. So, like, she actually got really lucky to find a name, in my opinion. So Scott probably was like, oh, she fluked that one, like, in the back of his mind. Because, yeah, like, for example, when this game came out, I remember I actually had a little, bit of, like, I was so obsessed with it that I actually had a little hand at origami. And it's like, hey, I'm not going to be subscribed to a magazine. I just, like, looked at YouTube tutorials online. So it's really far-fetched to think that, oh, yeah, because this killer does origami as his trademark, that he's going to be subscribed to this exact magazine. And on top of that, to cross it with a list where you're saying, oh, he's got a Royal 5, he clearly got it from this exact shop in Philadelphia. So it's just like, what if someone just had a typewriter and then moved to town and then bought that? So yeah, such a far-fetched lead, and it doesn't kind of set in stone that this John Shepherd is the killer. But, like, it's one of those ones where we can nitpick, till Christmas on, like, flaws of this game. But, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, I guess.
It is, and I mean, obviously, get with the twist in mind as well. I'm guessing that, yeah, there is a little bit of clutching at straws, that maybe the writer's thinking, how can we move this forward? Because obviously we know what one particular character is actually doing throughout the entirety of this game, so there needed to be a little bit of, like, leniency in, like, how it moves forward to ultimately get it to a point where we can have the big reveal, but yeah, I mean, obviously moving on. Actually, you know what? Before we do wrap up, I wanted to give a nice little shout out to a moment in this scene. It's the bit where, when it cuts to both characters and they're clearly talking and discussing stuff about the case, but the score takes over in the background. Again, I thought that was just a really nice cinematic touch from Quantic Dream. I think you don't really necessarily get these moments too often in games. It's quite heavy on the dialogue or the score. It's one or the other. But the fact that you've got them sort of working in unison, I thought that was a really nice touch. But we now move on. We head over to the cemetery. Simple, really. They've got the name John Shepherd. They're looking for his grave. And I'll give you a little bit of trivia as well. So basically, and I think this happened in your playthrough, lad, if you leave the cemetery before you find the grave, Lauren will call you back and Scott will make a joke saying, didn't anyone ever tell you not to shout in a cemetery? So that's the little bit of trivia for that scene. But one observation I was going to raise is, when you first played this, mate, did it take you ages to find the grave? Because it looks, for me, just watching it, it looks really difficult.
Yeah, you know what? Like, I'm pretty sure if you take too long, Lauren will automatically find it for you. And I think this stream is the first time I found it myself, because I roughly kind of know where it is. I know it's a little far up and to the right. That's the only memory I had going into this. But yeah, like, every other playthrough I've had, I've just been there clutching at straws, looking in the wrong patches until Lauren's like, it's over here, I found it. And I'm like, God damn it. But yeah, it can be quite tricky.
And what did you think when we saw Kramer go over to put flowers on the grave? When you first played the game, do you remember what your thinking was? Like, did you think that actually it could be his son or him that's the killer?
It was a nice surprise because, like, although I never suspected Gordy as the killer, because, like, I was like, yeah, like, if someone says they're the killer, they're not going to be the killer. Like, it just gave it away in the first half of the game. But yeah, like, it was, like, quite a nice surprise because it's like, oh, wow, this guy's clearly got a connection. And we later on will find out what that is, you know, by the end of this analysis episode. But I was really intrigued.
Good stuff. I mean, we now move on to a flashback scene, which is prompted again with a bit of dialogue between Scott and someone I think that works at the cemetery. Really nice touch. I like the sort of the way the color palette changes. It sort of slightly goes more black and white to suggest that it's in the past. But we're just following these two boys on this construction yard, really, aren't we? They've got very obviously a neglectful father, and there's some great opportunities for some QTEs. But one thing I wanted to throw at you, mate, because I can't find any trivia here to suggest otherwise. But do you know what happens, like, if you fail any of the QTEs? Like, maybe when you're, like, on the girders, like, almost like treating like monkey bars, or if you're on the balance beam. Like, do you know what happens if you fail them?
There's nothing like, you know, jeopardy. Like, you'll just be a bit slower. I think you might get hurt a little bit. Whether you get cuts and bruises from doing it, I don't know. That would be a cool detail, and it's one I will have to find out. But yeah, like, obviously throughout the scene, your little brother's just an absolute little shit. He's saying, "Come on, slowpoke," even though, like, you're pretty much right behind him, and he'll just, like, get the opportunity to say a few more of those annoying dialogues.
Oh, cool. I mean, there was a little observation that I did want to raise, actually. It might be me going a little bit too far, but I thought that actually it would be very clever, like, if that this was intentional by the people at Quantic Dream. But there's, like, certain little moments when you're playing as the little boy in this bit that reminded me of, like, the butterfly trial. And I don't know if, again, because we know who we're playing as, like, whether this is like almost a subconscious thing, like this memory had a bearing on a particular trial. But I just think of, like, there's a bit where you sort of slide down a pipe, for example, and it just reminds me in the butterfly trial when Ethan goes down the slide. You've got a bit where he's working his way in between, like, these poles that are sort of positioned very closely on the floor. And again, that reminds me of, like, the bit where you're going past the pylons with all the electricity. So again, I don't know, that could be completely unintentional, complete miss. But again, like, if that was something that was consciously thought of when designing this scene, and then obviously subsequently the butterfly trial, I just thought that was something noteworthy and very clever on Quantic Dream's part.
Yeah, I've never thought about that, but I love everything about that, and I love the idea that, yeah, the flashbacks actually inspire how he builds the trials. So yeah, no, mate, really fair play on that thought.
Yeah, because I did carry on, like, watching it. Like, when I thought of that, and I was like, there's, like, the leap of faith bit, and I was like, oh, is there anything, like, to do with a leap of faith? I couldn't think of anything, but yeah, like, again, it's just like a nice little observation. So we're now going to change tack. We're now going to join Madison, and she's on her quest after obviously the showdown with the Doc. She's going to be going to look for a guy called Paco who rents one of the apartments on Marble Street that the Doc has. I mean, mate, I've waffled on quite a bit so far, so honestly, take it away with this chapter.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, just a really interesting location. Like you say, like, Quantic Dream are the masters of just building different settings, and, like, you know, like, we've seen, like, Nathaniel's gloomy religious apartment. We've seen, like, the opening with Ethan's lovely house. And here again, we get, like, another cool setting where we're in, like, a hustle bustle with, like, a nightclub. You know, really nice song in the background, and, you know, it's pretty cool. And I remember the first time I played this or saw someone play it, it took me quite a long time because, you know, your goal is to get, you know, talking to this Paco guy. And, you know, you're trying to get his attention. You realise he's a bit of a ladies' man, a bit of a sleazebag. So you're trying to, like, really, like, seduce him. That's kind of the puzzle here. And you're dancing on the things and he's not noticing you. And then, like, there's no sort of clue, but you really have to just, like, kind of stumble upon the bathroom and kind of do stuff like, you know, start putting makeup on, you know, cutting, like, your shorts even shorter, going, like, for the more sexy look, and then you get talking to him. And yeah, like, it's quite an interesting scene. I think I spoke to someone before who says it is a little controversial that they have to sexualize Madison. Because I've said, like kind of talking about like the whole like feminism point of view, that like, oh god, she's just reduced to this nurse character, and now she's finally getting these independent scenes. Yeah, she got the doc one, but now like, she got sexually assaulted doing that, and then instantly like we're good taking her and like she's got to like seduce like a sleaze bag in order to get information, and it is a bit like, there is an argument to say that it's a little controversial to do that. But I mean, before I throw it back to you, I kind of just want to sort of say, like, I guess it's a bit of an Easter egg, and it might be in the trivia section that you cover, so I might jump the gun on this one, so apologies for stealing your point if I am. But Paco, a little bit of an Easter egg. I don't know if you recognise him, but, like, his character model appears in every Quantic Dream game. Admittedly, with Heavy Rain, it's a little bit different, because he's the guy who owns the nightclub. However, in every other game, he will play as a cop. From like this game onwards, so like in Beyond Two Souls, he's like the person interviewing like Ellen Page right at the start of the game, and then in Detroit Become Human, which is the game you've played, mate, he is the cop that knocks on your door when you're kind of like, playing as Kara, and you go to that refuge house like in the snow, where like you're with that son Adam, and he's kind of at the door. So you'll probably recognise the face character model, but yeah, he can actually kill Luther as well if he catches you guys. So yeah, like it's just cool that they have a little Easter egg where they bring back the same character model for every game. So it'll be interesting to see if Paco rocks up again in Star Wars Eclipse, mate.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, it's not in this trivia section. So no, that's a really good spot, because I didn't think of it, but now actually thinking about what he looks like and then going back to Detroit, yeah, that makes complete sense. So yeah, that's a nice little touch. That's a nice little good thing to know. I mean, as far as other things in this chapter goes, there is a trophy you can get. It says take off no more than one item of clothing during the striptease. And then as far as other little trivia bits here, it says if Madison was injured by electric tools in the dock, you can see her wounds during the striptease. It also says that you don't have to apply lipstick or musk Madison's hair to get Paco's attention. But you know what? Coming back to the feminism point, I was actually going to raise it to you, so I'm glad you mentioned it. But by the same token, mate, men are not exactly showed to be the greatest things either, are they? Like when you think about how like aggressive Blake is, how casual his boss is to like, not getting the right culprit, you could argue that Ethan's like a pretty poor father figure, like for losing two sons. You've got the doc, you've got the taxidermist guy, you've got Mad Jack, like the list goes on that like men are actually pretty bad. So I was just thinking, like, just going back against like the whole feminism thing. It's like, yeah, like there's some.
And you've got a motel receptionist that doesn't wash his hands either. So yeah, I completely get you, lad. Despite all of that, though, I actually quite like the scene where you end up going up to Paco's room and you do have to do the striptease thing, because you do get badass Madison once again, where you like cup him by the balls and you get the answers out of him. And I do think it's quite funny if you pick the option distraction, so she does like fake orgasms to make sure the security guy doesn't come in. But yeah, no, I thought it was really cool. You know what? One thing I will actually praise this whole sort of chapter for, mate, is that I constantly have been saying, is it really necessary for Ethan to tackle the trials head on? Because it's like, can't you just ask the mechanic in trial 1 who handed this car in, do little underhand things like that? I feel like Madison's chapters very much do that. Like, she goes to the guy who rents the marble apartment and she kind of chases that lead. So it's a lead you might not think about, but it's actually a really clever one. So I like the fact that Madison's chapters are kind of a little outside the box in that regard.
Yeah, that's true, because it's like, you've got Ethan who's like at the heart of the thing, and then you're playing as two other detectives. So yeah, you would almost consider like Madison as like the slight outsider in this whole thing, but like her story and her chapters like do still hold their own. Like she has some of the best chapters of the game in my opinion. So yeah, I completely get that. I mean, obviously the scene ends, she gets her information, she leaves, and this is what I think's brilliant, because you'd think that we're now leaving that location, but we're not. We're going back to the same location, but as a different character, and that just it took me by complete surprise when I did my first playthrough. And like, speaking for me personally, whether it's a film, a TV series, or a game, there's just something about like nightclub scenes that I really, really enjoy, especially when it's fitted with like the crime genre as well, and there's potentially a chase or some like shit going down. Just that setting is really cool. So I'm glad that we got to stay here with Norman. But of course, he goes in. He has a little bit of a back and forth with the guard, but he's looking for Paco himself. And then we see this shadowy figure knock on Paco's door, and they have a brilliant use of the split screen again. I feel like I'm saying this every episode. But we see the killer shoot Paco in the head, and we clearly know that a fight scene's going to go down. I mean, mate, take it away. What did you think of the fight scene and the stuff that followed?
Yeah, like, you know what? It is a really cool fight scene. I actually have seen a few people say that that's where they guessed who the killer was by the body frame. So if you did know who it was at this point, fair play. Maybe, you know, there's an argument to say that it was too obvious. It didn't fool me at this point, I'm not gonna lie. I actually got fooled till the very end. But you know what, like, one thing I really like about this whole scene, and it's not actually to do with the fight scene, but it's to do with Norman afterwards when he leaves and like he's trying to find out who this guy was that came in, is that he pins the security guard up into the, you know, the wall. And I feel like he's released Ethan, he's fell out with, you know, like Captain Perry and Blake, and he's doing things on his own. And Norman clearly is like at breaking point, and it's cool to see that Norman's kind of like cutting a few corners, and he's still like a good egg, but he is kind of like, you know, he's at the end of his rope basically, and he's like lost all patience, and it is really cool just to see that side of him. The only other thing I want to comment on is the fact that I often see people compare Norman with Connor from Detroit Become Human, because they're kind of both like the good egg cop figures, you know, who, you know, like are programmed or kind of like want to solve this case really bad because it's in their nature, it's what they're there to do. And if you want to say who's the better out of the two, what I will say is that when the fish tank gets broken in both games, Connor can actually save the fish, Norman that just doesn't. So I would argue that Connor is the better person.
Interesting. And this has happened a couple of times now, where something's happened in Heavy Rain, and then something, again, it's been almost like repeated in Detroit Become Human, but then there's been like a slight change to it. I remember when you mentioned about like the whole, you know, like the Nest chapter in Detroit Become Human, and then obviously in Heavy Rain, like they were two separate chapters, like the market chase and then the bit afterwards with the investigate, and then they slammed it together, which is good because I think it then shows that at Quantic Dream there's like Easter eggs for like fans that have played previous games, but it goes to show that they're like improving subtle things as well, and that's obviously like saving the fish with Connor, so that's really cool. Okay, so yeah, we then rock on back with Ethan, who is with Madison. They've met back up at the motel again, and we get a little bit of a hanky-panky scene, mate. I mean, going into it, like, was you thinking, you know what, fuck it, yeah, let's just get them together, you know? Because I know you said you wasn't a big fan of Grace. So yeah, what was your thinking?
Yeah, like, like I say, my blind playthrough was a watch because I didn't own a PS3, so I just watched the person get with Madison. But I do think it gives you the better ending because, you know, long story short, cutting ahead to the finale here, if you're not intimate with Madison, you end up with Grace again at the end. If you are intimate with Madison, you won't see Grace again at all, and then, you know, you'll end, and potentially, whether you have a good ending with both of them, you can have a happy ending with Madison, which is cool. One thing I really liked about the scene is that, you know, like, Ethan's grief will play out, like, from killing a man, you know, like, in the shark trial, which I thought was really cool. It's like, so yeah, no, it's just really nice to see that I imagine dialogue varies at the start of the scene as well, whether you kill a man or not, because I imagine grief would just be sad, but for another reason that he wasn't able to do it, so he doesn't get, like, clues or whatever. Tell you what, mate, one thing I will say about this chapter is that I love, like, sleazy motel sex by a mini fridge as much as the next guy, right? But what I will say is that I do find it funny how the man's just killed someone. He possibly has like a lot of electrical burns, a missing finger, and a drowning son. But he's just constantly there like, oh, I don't have time, I've got to do the next trial to find my son. But he does find it, you know, he does find enough time in his schedule to, like you say, have a bit of, you know, sleazy motel, hanky-panky sex with Madison, and then fall asleep. I mean, I get the guy needs rest at some point, but I just was like, really? A little far-fetched, mate.
Yeah, the man's just getting what he can at this point, isn't he? I think he's just, yeah. I mean, it's funny because you say about there's a lot in the trivia about like the variation you get, whether it's dialogue or whether it is the injuries, and that is here, and that touches in the trophies as well. So you got Loverboy, it's forgive Madison, Unforgivable, don't forgive Madison, Hands Up, get arrested by Blake, and then Escape Master, escape the police. One little thing I'm going to ask is, do you know what happens if you get arrested by Blake?
Yeah, you know what? I think if you get caught, I think that is the end for Ethan. I feel like there are endings which involve him in a cell. I don't think Norman can break him out twice. I might be wrong in saying this, but you know how I got caught with Ethan earlier?
Yeah.
I think that scene can get pushed back. But if Ethan gets arrested twice, that is it for him. But if you don't get arrested the first time, I think, like Norman can still free him in the cell later. So it's almost like you get two bites at the cherry. But if Ethan's arrested twice, that's it. You don't get any more Ethan scenes. And, it's down to the other characters to basically save Sean. And you won't see Ethan again.
Really? So what, do they then assume that he's the origami killer, or do they just arrest him on the grounds of like evading police or something like that?
Yeah, they'll assume he's the origami killer, and unless proven innocent till the end of the game, which Norman and Madison still have the power to do.
I love that, and this is why I'm beating this drum. I so want crime games to be more of a thing for choice-based, because you get these moments where you can literally have the wrong suspect. You see in LA Noire as well, like you can arrest the wrong suspect and that can be, essentially the end of the case, which I just love that. It then rewards players that have like sort of really thought about it and looked at evidence, etc, etc. But obviously in your gameplay and in my gameplay when I played, we did escape. One little nitpick though, when he's on the roof and they've basically got him surrounded, why the fuck would he just like fall backwards? Like when he jumps off the building, I'm like, mate, you don't know what's behind you. You could fracture your skull, fuck up your spine. Like, I know it's like a cool way to exit, but it's not like there's water beneath you. There's this rock hard concrete and you're at a decent height, but he still manages to get up and get away. And I'm just like, mate, this is like flashbacks of like that fight scene in The Devil in Me, when like the Dumet's got like Jamie or Kate at the top and then he throws her off and she falls through all this scaffolding, but she comes up fine. I'm like, oh, come off it. But again, there's a little nitpick, but I know you wanted to say something, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, to reply to that point, mate, I think we have established that Ethan is, mate, he's basically bulletproof because, like, he goes through the trials. And also, if you remember in the prologue, he basically gets hit by a car. And that, and then somehow Jason dies. So, we know this man is bulletproof, mate. But yeah, what I was going to say, though, is that obviously, after the intimacy scene with Madison, we do get that little cool scene where you'll wake up first and as you leave you knock her possessions and then you find out she's a journalist. And I actually really like this scene for two reasons. Like, one being like the motel scenes do get kind of repetitive and this does mix it up a little bit, and this is kind of like the conclusion bursts out into this scene, so it is cool that you get a little bit of like turmoil between the pair, and you can choose to forgive Madison or not, and that leads to another kind of, finale ending, depending on what you do there. But also, we praised the actor for Ethan, I think his name's Pascal, in, the lizard scene. I love his voice acting. He's clearly so mad at Madison, and I've really, bought into his character. So yeah, I just wanted to praise that. But the other real reason I really like the scene is that one of my favourite books is called Stone Cold by Robert Swindoll. Don't know if you ever read it. It's a 90s book about someone who's homeless, and then he actually falls in love with a girl, and then the girl ends up being a journalist doing a whole report on homelessness, and then at the end he has to kind of call her to get himself saved, and it just seemed very similar. And the whole time I was playing this kind of chapter, it just reminded me, whether they drew inspiration from that book or not, I'm unsure, but yeah, no, I still think that it is cool. I did end up forgiving Madison because at the end of the day I did believe that she wasn't just a journalist there for a story. At the end of the day, she clearly does care about you. She goes above and beyond, and she's basically the reason you're getting through these trials. So yeah, I think it's perfectly valid to trust Madison at this point.
Yeah, I mean, crossing over to, I can't remember if this has already happened or if, if we've got our like order messed up or whatever, but moving over to another male-female duo, we're going back to Scott and Lauren. There was that whole scene, mate, where they stumble into Kramer, they knock you both out, and then they trap you in a car, don't they, and then put you into some sort of lake or whatever to drown. I know that in my gameplay, me with NPCs, I think I did leave Lauren to die, which in a weird way, like if you're thinking from Scott's perspective, like that's probably something he wouldn't necessarily mind given how close she was getting, earlier on in the investigation. But so yeah, obviously she died for me, but you went to save her, mate.
Yeah, you know what is interesting is that like on my actual original playthrough, I was struggling with the QTEs massively, and I cut my losses, and I actually left her as well. On the stream, I was successful. I kind of like slightly remembered, I knew what to do, and I did get Lauren out. I love their little bit of dialogue as well. Like they have a bit of fun afterwards, kind of thing. Like after like you are able to save her. But one thing I would argue is that like the game, it is probably arguably better if Lauren dies at this point. Don't get me wrong, I love the endings with Lauren in them. I think it's worth having her alive to have those endings. But in terms of when you blind play it and you don't know the twist, it makes you root for Scott that much more. And it also fuels our hate for Kramer that much more as well. And it probably makes the next scene we're about to talk about and the last scene we're about to talk about in this analysis that much more effective, mate.
100%. I was going to say this because now we're fully, especially with what you were saying before about, how a lot of people might have sussed who the killer was from the shadow, like the body frame and stuff. It sort of positions the player to like really back Scott now, which I think is quite clever, again, knowing with what the twist is going to be. But it is great. You basically go to confront Kramer, don't you? It's a really fun scene. Lots of QTEs thrown at you. You feel like a badass because you're just taking down all these bodyguards. Pretty sure there's an achievement or a trophy for it as well, to basically shoot them all without getting hit or something. But then we do meet Kramer, and we then have a choice as to whether we, kill him or try to save him by getting him the pills. So, mate, what did you do?
Yeah, what I will say is first is I also love this scene, the whole action sequence. I actually got the trophy in the stream as well, although I will say if you do take bullets, it arguably looks cooler because it's fun just to see Scott get shot like mad and still just tighten through it. But you know what the scene reminds me of, mate? It's very James Bond-esque anyway, but your favourite game, LA Noire, it does remind me of like breaking into like that, is it Monroe, the property guy, like into his mansion at the end? It really reminds me of that scene massively, lad.
Yes, 100%. I didn't even think of that, but it's so true. And again, like I say, please give me more crime games and make them choice-based, because that is like the perfect blend for me. But so sorry, mate, going back to the choice, what did you do with Kramer?
You know what, so one thing I will say is that when I did this stream, I, for those, that were there, I do apologise because the chat froze, and a lot of people were advising me, like, what to do and stuff, but I just assumed no one showed up because I just had an empty chat room. So I was, like, very much, like, kind of a little deflated, a little bit like, oh, no one's here, so I'm just playing for myself, really. I wasn't really bouncing off anyone's energy. So, yeah, I was a little lame in this playthrough. But I always, I kill the guy, and it's up until the point where, his heart meds are kind of like, he's like, oh, give me my meds. But then, like, he says that one line, like, oh, no one will miss him. Like, he was a street, like, kid, like, a street rat. And I'm just like, oh, you classist dick. Like, yeah, you are not making it out alive. With an attitude like that, I don't want you breathing the same air as me. So, not only did I kill the guy, but I sort of, like, teased him a little bit. I took the meds out of his drawer and then walked off with his meds. Which is even funny, and it's funny because I look at the chat room afterwards and everyone was laughing because I ended the stream with just 2 people saying like, oh my god, he took his meds. So yeah, like I actually rubbed salt in the wound that much more. I thought it was funny. But you know what, like, although I thought no one was in the chat room, Felicie, one of our longtime fans, mate, always wants us to be chaotic and kill people. And I just was like, I know if she was here, she'd be voting to kill this guy. I kind of want to do it anyway, but for Fleecy, I was like, yeah, we are killing the guy. It also kind of makes sense as well from the Goldie angle as well, because it's like, oh yeah, like, although if you keep them alive, it's kind of like, yeah, you could frame them. I do still subscribe to the idea that these Kramers that have come in and have killed one of the boys kind of like tarnishes and pollutes like the art that this killer has going on of like, you know, drowning like the thing, trialing the dad. So yeah, like I think it probably is the correct call to do it. But one thing I will nitpick about though, at one point Scott says like, oh, do you know what happened to like the guy's brother? So he's obviously talking about himself. But that makes sense if you plan to keep the guy alive, because it's like you've planted that in his mind. However, I just killed the guy anyway, so it almost seemed pointless I said it. But yeah, no, absolutely love everything about this chapter, because it's got the action, but it's also got a major choice in there. So yeah, just thumbs up for me.
Yeah, that bit about the brother, it makes me wonder again if that's like more like the writers of the game trying to cover up the fact, you know, they're really trying to protect that twist, you know, that it's not going to be him as the killer. So like they're just trying to cover all areas, especially, you know, like I say, with the fight earlier on as well. But yeah, I mean, that, guys, wraps up the penultimate analysis of Heavy Rain. So next Sunday, it's going to be the finale. We're going to see if Liam manages to kill everyone off or manages to save them all. Until then, do let us know what your comments are, you know, what choices you made, your overall thoughts of the scenes that we discussed in this video. And yeah, catch you next time.
See you guys.